Welcome my fellow gamers, I'm the Body Counter, and today I'm going to be doing a different kind of Battlefield 1 video. Today, I'll be sharing with you a history lesson, and something that seems like a missed opportunity that DICE could have included in the Russian DLC. For this video, I'll be sharing with you a great story about Russia's newly formed fighting force, the Army Without a Nation, the Czechoslovak Legion. As a disclaimer, please take pity on my Russian pronunciation. There'll be a few Russian names in this video, and wanted to let you know I'll try my best to pronounce them properly. During World War I, Austria-Hungary's prime threats in the region were the Italians, Serbians, and Russians. But like many soldiers fighting in the war, not everyone was keen to fight in such a horrific conflict. But for the Czechs and Slovaks fighting under the flag of Austria-Hungary, many knew they were fighting for the wrong side. Around halfway through the war in 1916, many Czechs and Slovaks living in Russia at the time, or soldiers who had defected from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, wanted to fight for the Allies against the Central Powers. Many reasons for this was the fact that many Czech and Slovak soldiers in the Austro-Hungarian Empire would be forced to kill other Slavs, such as Serbians and Russians, the closest other blood that they had that wasn't their own. But the primary goal for these Czechs and Slovaks was to win their independence from the Austro-Hungarian Empire and claim Bohemia and Morava as theirs. By 1916, the Czechs and Slovaks in Russia had convinced the Russian army's highest-ranking officers to form the Czechoslovak Legion. The volunteers of the Legion were primarily Czechs, and fought few battles against both Germany and Austria-Hungary during World War I. For a time, the Legion had an estimated 60,000 to 70,000 soldiers. The Legion would fight alongside the Russians in the Battle of Zborov against the Austro-Hungarians, being the only successful battle of the failed Kerensky offensive in 1917. And in 1918, the Legion would find themselves fighting alongside the Russian Bolsheviks against the Germans in the Battle of Bakhmut. Not only did the Czechoslovak Legion fight in Russia, but were sent to France and Italy as well to offer support on the Western Front and Italian Front. In 1917, while Russia's civil war had just begun, the Bolshevik government was being ordered by the German Empire to cease the transportation of Legion forces to France through the coastal city of Archangel. Instead, the new Russian government would instead relocate their movement to the coastal city of Vladivostok through Siberia. This alternate route would take longer for the evacuation of Legion soldiers, but during this relocation route, Leon Trotsky, the commissar of the newly formed Soviet Union's military, also had Germany on his tail concerning the Legion men. Trotsky then commenced the arrest of all Legion soldiers, severing the deal that the Bolsheviks and Legion made, and sparking the Legion's hatred of the new political party. One of the main events that caused more tension between the Bolsheviks and the Legion was the arrest and execution of Czech men in Chelyabinsk after Czech soldiers stopped a Hungarian train within the city and killing a passenger who retaliated against the Legion. Though this could be a false accusation made by the Bolsheviks as an excuse to kill the Legion soldiers within the city. This only fueled the anger between the Legion and Bolsheviks. After the incident, the Legion men claimed the city of Chelyabinsk and rescued those captured by the Reds. In the next few months, Legion forces would begin occupying many cities, including Petropavlovsk, Kangst, Kurgan, Novonikolavsk, and Marinsk. Meanwhile, further east in Siberia, the White Russians had formed a provisional government within Omsk, with Vladivostok as their capital. This anti-Bolshevik movement would go on to claim a large segment of the Trans-Siberian Railway. Other cities would then be occupied by the White Russian forces, such as Omsk, Irkutsk, Chita, and Syzran. During their conquest of cities and strategic points in Russia, a small Legion force was making its way to Ekaterinburg, where the Tsar and his family were under house arrest by the Bolsheviks since 1917. But after hearing the Legion were approaching, the men responsible for the prisoners executed the royal family in fears that the Legion would rescue the Romanovs. During their fight across Russia, the Legion had obtained armoured trains and smaller train cars in order to traverse the Russian landscape safely. The standard rail cars came with everything: barracks, workshops, kitchens, bakeries, even hospitals. Not only that, but the soldiers even published their own newspaper for everyone on board. During their conquest in the Civil War, they managed to capture a priceless amount of the Tsar's gold and stow the treasure into 8 train carriages in the revolution center of Kazan. The Legion's actions in Russia caught the attention of many international forces. America and Britain hoped to evacuate the Legion and use their strong force against the Germans back on the Western Front, An Allied intervention in Russia, if successful, could bring the Bolsheviks to their knees and bring Russia back into the war. But this plan would ultimately change. On November 11th, back in Europe, the Great War had ended. On October 28, 1918, Czechoslovakia was founded after the collapse of Austria-Hungary. Eventually, the news reached the Czechoslovak Legion in Russia. Everyone was overjoyed with the news, but at the same time, baffled as to why they were even fighting a civil war in Russia when they could be in their new homeland. So with the new news spreading across Russia, at the start of 1919, the Czechoslovak Legion forces began their journey across Siberia, using the Czech and White Russian-controlled segments of the Trans-Siberian Railway to reach their destination of Vladivostok. But back in Czechoslovakia, one of the first decisions made by the new government was for the Legion to assist the Allies' Russian intervention to defeat the Red Army. This would ultimately keep the Legion's hopes of returning home on hold. A year later, in 1920, the Bolshevik Red Army was retaliating with brute force. Almost all White Russian forces had been defeated, and many of the Allied forces were withdrawing from Russia. The Legion seemed to find themselves in yet again another difficult situation. They had one last option to return home. They struck a truce with the Bolsheviks. The Red Army would provide safe passage for all remaining Legion forces outside of Vladivostok. In return, the Czechoslovak Legion gave the Bolsheviks 7 train cars filled with the Tsar's gold. It is rumoured that the Legion managed to keep one of the gold-loaded carriages without the Red Army knowing. The train car held an estimated $100 million, which would make it back to Czechoslovakia. To ensure their deal, the Legion made a rather questionable act. White Army Admiral Alexander Kolchak, who had been collaborating with the Legion forces, was turned in to the Bolsheviks and executed, along with some other White Guard officers. After the deal, the Red Army kept their promise and allowed the remaining Legion to travel to Vladivostok. The men boarded several ships and set sail back to Europe, to their new home. A true legend, which sadly goes unnoticed in the world today. If the Legion were to be featured as a faction in the Russian DLC alongside the White Guard and Red Army, I would have been the happiest guy ever. Nothing else about Battlefield 1 would make me feel more joy than to see the Czechoslovak Legion represented in-game. Being half Czech myself, learning of this story has really made me appreciate my Czech heritage. I have many map ideas which could have been featured with the Legion as a fighting faction. Number 1, the Battle of Zborov, Legion vs Austria-Hungary, 1917. The only successful battle of the failed Kerensky offensive, the Battle of Zborov was the first major conflict the Legion fought in. Using infiltration tactics and shock troopers, Legion men managed to breach Austro-Hungarian lines. Russian soldiers also accompanied the Czechs during the battle. Map design would be fairly trench-orientated, 2 major trench lines per faction spawn, with no man's land in the middle, with large fields of barbed wire. A unique idea that could be implemented would be a combined Czech and Russian force. Assault and support could be Legion, while medic and scout could be Russian. Number 2, the Battle of Bakhmut, Legion vs Germany, 1918. More obscure than Zborov, but still interesting, this battle was fought between the Legion and the German Empire. During the battle, the Red Army were fighting alongside the Czechoslovak Legion, who had not yet been ordered to disarm and arrest the Legion. As a map, Bakhmut was a town, and so close-range engagements would be expected. If DICE wanted to go an extra step for realism, they could combine the Czech and Red Army forces together. Assault and support could be the Red Army, while the Legion could be medic and scout, similar to the previous map discussed. Number 3, the Battle of Vladivostok, Legion vs Red Army, 1918. Vladivostok stands as one of the most important points of interest in the Russian Civil War. A coastal city in Far East Russia close to Japan, the city was a key strategic position, and controlling it was vital for all parties. The Allies, Legion, White Guard, and the Red Army all contested for control. Vladivostok as a map would essentially be a larger scale version of Amiens. More buildings, wider streets, more verticality, and large courtyards and plazas for long-range engagements. An aesthetic feature I'd love to see in the map would be the inclusion of Allied nation flags on some of the larger buildings, such as the US, Italy, Japan, and the British Empire. Many were placed on these buildings during the Allied occupation of the coastal city, and it'd be pleasing to see all these flags together on one map. Number 4, the Battle of Kazan, Legion vs Red Army, 1918. Approaching from the Volga River, The Czechoslovak Legion and the White Army surrounded the city of Kazan, while an internal rebellion struck the city from the inside. The Red Army made use of captured Austrian and Hungarian soldiers from World War I as a part of their military force. Outnumbered 3-1, the Legion and Red Army were able to beat all Red resistance and liberate the city. Not only that, but this was the city in which the Legion obtained the Russian gold reserve, totaling at $650 million. For a map, having a Tsaritsyn building-styled city surrounded by smaller villages like the wooden houses in Brusilov Keep would combine close-range urban combat with medium to long-range combat on the outskirts of the city. Possible river combat could also be a potential feature too. Number 5, the Battle of Lake Baikal, Legion vs Red Army, 1918. Most likely the only naval battle the Legion undertook. Armed with few boats with makeshift artillery, they fought against the Red Army's lake-based fleet and armoured train. While outnumbered, the Legion emerged victorious. To balance the fact the battle was naval-based, half of the map should be in the waters, allowing for torpedo boats and wide-lighter crafts, and the other half on the shores where rail lines and few buildings can offer boots-on-the-ground combat. For behemoths, a similar system like Albion would be amazing. A dreadnought for the Legion and an armoured train for the Red Army, which would fit well as the Red Army actually used an armoured train during the battle and was destroyed by the Czech Legion. The list goes on, and since some of the Legion's history and notes have been lost or destroyed, many battles could be created with exaggeration, such as the occupation of Red Army cities and towns I mentioned previously. In place of the Red Tide operation, we could have two possible ideas instead of the White versus Red Army operation. Number 1, Will of the Legion. Focusing on the Legion's battles during World War I, this operation consists of the Battle of Zborov and Bakhmut during the last years of World War I. The Czechs and Slovaks fight alongside the White Guard and Red Army in two separate battles to prevent further engagements by the Central Powers in their quest for Bohemia and Morava independence. And number 2, Revolt. An operation spanning across Russia during the Russian Revolution, consisting of the Battle of Vladivostok and the Battle of Kazan. This large-scale operation sees the Czechoslovak Legion's conquest through the faction-torn lands of Russia, as they fight the newly founded SRFR towards their goal in securing their return to the newly founded nation of Czechoslovakia. Uniforms of the Legion varied mainly due to the country they fought for. When Czechs and Slovaks travelled to the Western and Italian front, they fought wearing French and Italian uniforms respectively, while those in Russia fought while wearing the traditional Russian infantry uniforms. Helmets consisted mainly of the French Adrian helmet variations, with the Legion badge on the front of the helmet. Though rarer than the Adrian helmet, it is possible the Legion made use of the Finnish M17 Solberg helmet, as they were used by the Red Army and White Army at different times of the Civil War. Weapons used by the Legion in Russia would most likely resemble the same arsenal as the Russians in World War I as well. Mosin-Nagants, Vetelis, Winchester 1895s, Arisakas, Nagant revolvers, and FN 1903s. Around 4,100 Czechoslovak soldiers died during World War I and the Civil War, not counting the unknown number who were declared MIA, a surprisingly low amount compared to the 170,000 White Army soldiers who died in the Civil War. These men fought a war they were vastly outnumbered in, ruled the railways, crushed the Bolsheviks, and travelled an unimaginable distance from Ukraine all the way to Vladivostok in Far East Russia. In their quest to return to their homeland they fought so hard to claim as theirs. Their efforts in both the Great War and the Russian Civil War must not be forgotten. Hercule Leguier. I hope you enjoyed this slice of history, as it was very interesting to learn of my second home's legendary time of rebellion and power. If you enjoyed, leave a like to show your support. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions or want to discuss anything. Subscribe to keep up to date for when I upload next. And as always, continue gaming on.